Well, thank you, Devamitra, and I want to thank all of you for coming this evening. I was wondering if anyone would bother to turn up. This is something I really wanted to do because, having been ordained for 50 years, I was ordained 50 years ago this morning, as it happens, with 4 other people. There's a picture of our ordination there on the shrine, basically, I remember when I was first diagnosed with cancer, which was just over 7 years ago. One of the first things that occurred to me was, oh no, I probably won't reach my 50th anniversary, which was somehow, it was always important to me. By that stage, I'd been ordained for 43 years. I'm still here, still hanging on in there, and so I'm very, very pleased indeed to have this opportunity. One of my most dear and long-standing friends is Subhuti. Some of you will know him. He is the president of the Devamitra Buddhist Center, and he and I were exchanging texts this morning, and he was just saying what a momentous occasion it is, which I feel it really is, and it's not just for me actually, but for those that I was ordained with as well, of course. I'll say a little bit about them in a moment, but he said, you're so lucky to have the opportunity to celebrate this anniversary in public. And I really think that's true. And I'm very, very grateful for the opportunity. Unfortunately, it was not an opportunity which fell to him a few weeks ago when he had his 50th anniversary. But I was ordained with 4 other people, one of whom died, Devamitra, and one of whom resigned after about 10 or 15 years, I think, a German academic called Triratna. So that left the 3 of us that were meeting this morning on Zoom to celebrate together, Devamitra and Nagabodhi and myself. We had to meet on Zoom because Devamitra lives in India and has done since 1978. He was principally responsible for, in fact entirely responsible for setting up our movement in India. Quite a remarkable feat. And Nagabodhi, some of you may be familiar with him from his recent biography of Bhante Sangharakshita, the man who ordained us. So 50 years ago, last night, we had our private ordinations. And I remember quite distinctly, we were ordained in Purley. Not the best setting in the world, Purley, for an ordination. Excuse me, I've got a bad cold at the moment, unusually for me. Anyway, yes, so we're ordained in Purley, which is just south of Croydon, not a pretty place, but I can think of many worse places. I remember going up to the top of the house in which we were ordained, and Bhante was sitting in a small room, one of the bedrooms in this place, before a small shrine, and as I came in through the open door, he was smiling very benignly at me, and I got the giggles. I got the giggles uncontrollably, and I giggled all my way through the private ordination. I just could not stop it, and once I get going, I'm very hard to stop, as some of my friends can testify. So it was a bit strange, but he didn't seem to mind that. In fact, he seemed rather amused by it. And of course, when you're ordained, you're given a new name, and the new name I was given was Devamitra, which means friend of the gods, godlike friend, or divine friend, that sort of thing. You get the idea, which was certainly news to me that that I had these kind of qualities. He said he gave me that name particularly because he thought I was a particularly friendly person, and that came as a surprise to me. I think it probably surprised a few people later down the line, especially when I first came to the LBC about a year after it was opened. I was running a centre in Norwich at the time, came down here because Subhuti was leaving, and after a mere 18 months, I was widely known as Ayatollah Devamitra. I don't think it was meant to flatter me. I don't know. I mean, I might be maligning the man, but I don't think he had a reputation for being particularly friendly. So you get the sort of idea. Get some idea of what the kind of life I've had in this wonderful order of ours. I must, before I go into the sort of that area of my life, unpopularity, which has actually been quite a feature of my life for about 40 years or so. It's quite a long time to be unpopular. Not with everybody, but with some people certainly. Quite a few people, as it happens. I don't think quite a few people have never quite recovered from their encounters with me. Yes, when I came to the LBC 6 years later, I was known widely as Ayatollah Devamitra. I didn't know that at the time. When I did find out, I think it's like, you've always got to look on the bright side of things, and I thought, well, at least, there's just flattering in a way. It implies that no matter, even if they don't like me, they can't ignore me. So, you take the positives out of any situation, don't you? And I think that summarises an attitude I've had throughout my whole order life. Always make the most of adversity. I mean, it's fundamental Buddhist teaching, actually. But I think I sort of understood that even before then, when I was an actor. That everybody has bad times. Certainly in that world, in the acting world, and I had a few. But you had to use those opportunities to grow. And so I was finding something similar when I became an order member. The reason for my unpopularity are probably quite varied, but it depends who you're talking to. But I've never been able to fathom, and neither have my friends. I have to say that despite the fact that a significant number of people seemed to quite dislike me, there was quite a few who had a very different angle on it. I've always had very good and loyal friends who've actually remained loyal friends throughout my life. So I've been very, very fortunate in all that. Why I was so unpopular, all sorts of reasons probably. I'm a blunt northerner, even though I don't sound like one. I came from the northeast of England. I was raised in the back streets of Middlesbrough, and my family were very blunt. And if you think, I mean, many people say that I'm very direct and can be quite blunt, which is probably true. But if you met members of my family, you'd think I was rather refined. I remember going to see a cousin who I'd not seen for about 15 years in Liverpool, which from my point of view was in the south of England. She'd moved south. But anyway, we hadn't seen each other for about 15 years, and first thing I said to her, I remember quite distinctly, I just looked at her and said, long time no see, lass. And she said, aye, well, whose choice was that then? It was you that cut yourself off from us, not us. But, that's what my family were like. That's what the people from Middlesbrough are like. You tell it as it is. And so I brought something of that quality to my life as an order member, and not everybody liked it. And Subhuti finally conceded that perhaps, given the extent of my, let's say, difficulties in this wonderful order of ours, that there might have been a class element in it. Being a blunt, working class, but blunt northern working class, in a predominantly middle class movement, I, of course, upset people by my more direct sort of approach to things. I remember, I do think there's quite a significant cultural divide in this country between North and South. About 10 or 15 years ago, I remember I was waiting at Euston Station for a train to Manchester. And as I was waiting, they flash up the platform for the train that you're catching, don't they? There's a mad rush down, this sort of sheep pen they herd you into to get on the train, and we were kept at the barrier. We were in the sheep pen, very, very crowded, and we kept at the barrier by these two very grim-looking, determined women who were going to keep the northern hordes out. And from the back of the crowd, a voice, this rather poignant voice, sort of wailed out, "Come on, love, we want to get back up north." they were completely unmoved. They just stood there, grim as ever. There's the mad dash of the train. Yes, I'm a northerner, even though I had my northern accent knocked out of me in drama school, of course. In those days, you had to learn to speak in a very plummy fashion. I no longer do. I could, but I can't be bothered now. And sometimes my northern accent comes back in. But I've just been reading the autobiography of Arthur Miller, famous American playwright, and he wrote a play called A View from the Bridge, a wonderful play, based, sort of classic tragedy, really. And it's set on the, it's set amongst Brooklyn sort of longshoremen. It's that kind of situation, Italians, and they're really down to earth and very passionate people. Anyway, there was going to be a production of this play in London, directed by Peter Brook, a very, very famous English director, young English director at that time. And Arthur Miller sat in on the auditions, and all the actors he was auditioning spoke in this very plummy sort of way. He said, "Look, this is not going to work. This just doesn't fit the kind of characters that I've written for." And anyway, Peter Brook apparently just turned to him and said, "Oh, that's right." Miller said, "What I need are the sons and daughters of plumbers, mechanics, those kind of people." And Brooke turned to him and said, "But they are the sons of plumbers and mechanics." He said, "This is how they've been taught to speak, because all the plays are written like that." No longer, thank goodness. Anyway, I'm getting completely lost. I knew this was always going to be a danger. I just go off on one side track and then completely away from ordination. Anyway, that just gives you a sense of my background. So I was ordained when I was 25. Hadn't a clue what I was doing. Most of us didn't then. I'm still not sure after 50 years that I'm entirely clear what it is that I'm doing. But I knew it was important. I felt impelled to do it for reasons unbeknown to me. And I still feel impelled to continue to do what I've been doing. So I was ordained with the four people I just mentioned. And for me, it was probably the most significant thing I've ever done, without a doubt. And I felt it immediately. And the only sort of comparison I could make in my mind was to getting married, for which I had no ambitions, by the way. For me, I was never the marrying kind. But this was, it was going to be my equivalent. It was that serious to me. I think that's almost what Bhante in the early days expected of us. I remember the first time someone was ordained, and then after they'd been ordained, they got married, he was really quite upset. He was quite happy to ordain married people, but I think he sort of felt, well, if you're single, if you're free, when you're ordained, why would you want to get married afterwards? Anyway, he didn't spell it out like that, but I think that was his attitude. I certainly picked up that quite strongly at the time. So in the early days, I think what happened, I tried to explain this recently in another talk. I think with my generation, he finally had a group of young people he felt he could work with, who he could trust and rely upon to get this movement established, to sort of realize his vision. And he's very, very concerned, clearly, to keep us on the case. And so there's a very strong emphasis in the early days on trying to keep out of especially heterosexual relationships, which some of us, myself included, found extremely difficult, because we were, it was the 60s. Well, no, it wasn't the 60s then, it was the 70s actually. The atmosphere of the 60s was still very, very present. And, all these lusty young people from, just emerging from hippiehood, trying to establish a Buddhist movement, a worldwide Buddhist movement at that. He didn't want us to go off and just settle down into a married life. That's my sort of reading of what he was trying to do. He really was quite firm with us about this. We almost didn't dare get into relationships. There was always a few clever ones who always managed it on the side. I couldn't. But he kept our minds very, very clearly focused on the Dharma and on spreading this movement. And looking back, it's quite remarkable that 10 years after I was ordained, we had centres not just here. I mean, when I was ordained, there was just one centre in Archway. This place didn't exist. We had someone running classes in Auckland, in New Zealand, of all places, from his home, and Vajrabodhi, a Finnish order member, was trying to get things going in Helsinki. But 10 years after I was ordained, we had a centre in the United States. We had a presence in Sydney. We had 3 centres in New Zealand. A whole host of centres all over the UK. People going off to Essen in Germany and other places. I can't remember them all. But the rate at which this movement expanded in the first 10 years was extraordinary. Of course, the big one was India. Devamitra, who I was ordained with, went to India and established things there. And there was a tremendous mushrooming of centres all over Maharashtra in western and central India and elsewhere. And the movement in India very quickly began to sort of dwarf the rest of the movement put together in terms of numbers of people involved. And it still is the case. The movement in India has always been very, very exciting, a very, very lively place, of course. So that all happened very, very quickly. And I think it's partly because several of us bonded together very, very strongly. We were thrown together a lot. We were with Bhante a lot. His influence on us was very, 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 very strong. His inspiration was very much alive within us. And I, for one, am deeply grateful that it was. And I'm deeply grateful to him for having the possibility to lead the life that I've led. I can't think of anybody else in the contemporary Buddhist world who has the same, I think, depth of understanding of the Dharma and how to practice it under the conditions of contemporary that we all live in, of contemporary society. And I've certainly met Buddhists from other traditions who would agree with that. They feel that he got it right because traditional Buddhism could not survive as it had been, as it had for centuries before in so-called traditional Buddhist countries. Something new was needed, and I think he had the key to all that. Okay. Anyway, I became responsible in 1982 for the Mitra system throughout the movement. Basically I was appointed the overall Mitra convener, a post I held for 20 years. It was my responsibility at that time to oversee the running of the Mitra system throughout our entire movement, including India, everywhere that we had a centre. It was my responsibility to make sure that system was run along more or less the same lines everywhere we had a presence. And so I fulfilled that responsibility for 20 years. And that's when I made myself really unpopular. Again, not with everybody, but I found it quite difficult at times. In fact, I nearly resigned. I tried to resign once because we were having trouble with one particular centre in Croydon, as it happens. And I was the only person who was the only order member who had a responsibility within the centre, as it were, from the outside. And things were going wrong. And it was principally me who had to go down there and try to sort of get things changed, which didn't make me popular with the order members there. In the end, it came good, but it was a lot of hard work, and I had a lot of poison to drink during the course of those years. But it just seems that that's part of what you get when you lead this kind of life, when you assume a major responsibility. You have to learn to live with some degree of unpopularity. It's happened to all my friends in various degrees, I think, those of us who've stuck around for so long. Doesn't happen to everybody, but to many of us it does, because you're trying to sort of keep things, you're trying to sort of keep the spirit of things alive, trying not to let them settle too much. Because if you do that, you just lose the momentum, the inspiration, the core inspiration of what we're trying to do. Anyway, for all sorts of reasons, I became rather unpopular as the overall Mitra-convener. And in the end, I had to resign after 20 years because the whole mood of the movement had changed round about the early 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s. And I suddenly found myself without a job, or without my responsibility, no means of support. I was 54 at the time. I didn't know how else to support myself. I had always assumed that I would work within the movement and be supported by the movement, as I had been for the better part of 30 years, because I'd been right at the heart of things. And suddenly I felt I was on the outside, at least of where the action was, so to speak. So then began a period of about, over 12 years actually, of what one of my young friends called my wilderness years. Didn't mean to say that I went away, but somehow I didn't have the same opportunities that I'd taken for granted to just communicate the Dharma, to teach the Dharma. For instance, I used to be invited all over the place to give talks, and suddenly the invitation stopped. And I had to sort of deal with that. It was very, very difficult. Towards the end of that period, I finally ended up, basically, I've been living in a community in Birmingham. We've been drawn there by Bhante, about 11 of us, to form what was then called the Preceptors College Council. It no longer exists. I was a member of that core team. We were living with him in Birmingham, but around about 2000, I resigned as Mitra convener in 2002, and then 10 years later, we sold Majjhima-loka, the community I was living in order to purchase a large retreat centre in Herefordshire, which is now called Adhisthana. I was hoping to be able to go there, but I didn't have that opportunity. So suddenly I was homeless, or about to be homeless. As soon as I knew I couldn't go to this new place, I organised the next 18 months of my life. And for 2.5 years, I was just basically wandering from place to place. I didn't have enough money to pay for storage of my belongings, so I had to give them all away. Mostly, apart from a few precious books, which a friend agreed to store for me in his warehouse for free. But basically, I just had to leave everything behind. And I went to Melbourne, where I was still president of the Melbourne Buddhist Centre. First of all, I'd been invited there by two of my long-standing friends, Siladasa and Buddhadasa. And from there, I just travelled basically between Melbourne, Nagpur in India, where I'd done quite a lot of teaching, and I was going there regularly, Gushaloka in Spain to do solitary retreats, and Singapore between on my way to Australia usually, because I've been teaching at the Buddhist Library in Singapore for many years, and was very good friends with the monk who runs it, a Sinhalese Theravadin called Devamitra, who was a very, very good friend to me. Now, during this period, of course, when things sort of turn out not quite as you'd hoped or expected, you reflect a lot. And on one of my visits to Singapore, I was passing, I remember sitting down and talking with Devamitra, my monk friend there. He regarded me as an honorary monk, even though I wasn't a monk. He was asking me, well, how things were going, and I was quite frank with him. I said, well, this is what's happened. And he just looked at me and he said, but Devamitra, who will look after you when you're old? And it was very strange, because that had been a question which had occasionally troubled me for about 2 years beforehand. And I remember looking back at him and said straight away, I said, I don't know. Maybe nobody will. And as soon as I said that, I knew that it didn't trouble me and wouldn't trouble me again. I've never been concerned about that subsequently. But it was one of those one of those fears that arise at a certain stage of life, especially in midlife. I suppose it's kind of like a midlife crisis. Anyway, when I finally left Majjhima Loka, not knowing where I could live, because I wanted to live in a men's community. I'd been living in men's communities all my life. I couldn't get into another one, not one that appealed to me anyway. It was like, I don't know, something was, I had to really radically rethink my life. But the moment I stepped out the front door of Majjhima Loka, that community in Birmingham, for the last time, I was overcome by bliss. I don't know why, I just was. I didn't know where I was headed, other than towards Melbourne initially, but I was absolutely happy. It was as if a burden had fallen away from me. I think what that was for me, it represented a sort of deepening of my going forth. And the principle of going forth is fundamental to Buddhist practice. It reflects the fact that the Buddha, or the Buddha to be, left home in order to gain enlightenment. And that's sort of symbolised in our own ordination by the private ordination ceremony. So it felt to me very much like that's what was happening. And the 2.5 years where I had no base, nowhere to live. I always had somewhere to stay, but nowhere to live. I didn't have a base. Were probably some of the happiest times of my life. It was very, very strange. And as part of that, I decided to do a 9-month solitary retreat, partly because unexpectedly my mother, when she died, left me quite a lot of money, more than I didn't in fact expect to inherit anything from her, because I thought that was all going to be taken up in care for her, but she died sooner than I'd anticipated, and that gave me enough money to buy a house in Cambridge, tiny house, the cheapest house on the market, and that then served to support me. It was the basis of my support, but it didn't give me enough money to pay rent, my own rent, but that didn't matter anymore. I didn't have to pay rent. I could go and do a 9-month solitary retreat. It was an opportunity that I knew probably wouldn't arise again, and so I took that opportunity. I'd done lots of solitary retreats throughout my life. Bhante used to insist, the only two things he ever expected of all the members was to do at least 2 hours meditation every day. Got it? Plus an annual solitary retreat of at least 1 month. I haven't always managed 2 hours of meditation every day. I've managed at least an hour, and very often more. But I've always managed, pretty much, apart from my period towards the end of my so-called wilderness years when I had no money, to go on solitary retreat. I've done a lot of solitary retreats. I used to hate them, and I learned to love them. And doing that 9-month solitary retreat was probably one of the most important things I've done in my life. And I'm so grateful that I had that opportunity. Now, the story I've told you might seem a little bit grim. I hope not. I hope not. I didn't intend it that way. But I want it because I've had many absolutely wonderful moments in my life as an order member. And I have absolutely no doubt whatsoever that I've led a very, very good life, the best possible life that I think I could have led. So I'm very, very grateful for that. But I've had a bit of a rough ride at times, not always, but at times. And I think it's those difficult times which have been the greatest sort of points of growth for me. Because when things go difficult, you have to ask yourself questions. Well, why? And what part did I have to play in all that? You really need to examine yourself very, very closely. And I was able to do that. And I think I learned a lot from all that. Which brings me back to the principle of making the most of adversity. One of the worst things we can do in life, if you really want to help yourself, is to complain. When I was in my 50s, I made a very, very firm resolve not to complain about anything. And I've managed pretty much to do that. Because I could see the way some of my friends were going. You know, once you reach that stage of life, you start complaining and moaning about just about everything. And it's the path of misery. I didn't want to be on the path of misery. I wanted to be on the path of bliss. I didn't mind if at times that was pretty tough, and certainly it was, but it was still the path, ultimately, of bliss. I think that at this stage of my life, I have never been so consistently happy. Even when I was diagnosed with cancer, in fact, I think that everything that's happened so far prepared me for the cancer diagnosis, and it is a fairly serious diagnosis. I do have a metastatic cancer, which means that it's slowly spreading throughout my body. Well, at the moment, it seems to have paused, which it's not supposed to do. But anyway, that's a whole other issue. My oncologist is baffled. She said it's never happened to any of her other prostate cancer patients. Once a cancer starts spreading, it's usually only a matter of time before you fall off your perch. But here I am, still sitting on it. I don't know for how much longer, but I'll keep going as long as there's life in the old dog. So my life has been dedicated to practicing the Dharma and trying to communicate that with others. And I think that I can't think of anything which would have made me so happy as doing that stand, despite all the problems that I've had. I mean, well, difficulties, let's say, mostly with other people. But somehow you've got to learn from that, and I think I've managed to do that. I think that, well, I've said this quite a lot, it's become very obvious to me now at this stage of my life just how powerfully the Dharma has affected me. I think that I've changed quite radically from the rather arrogant young man I was when I was 25, when I was ordained. I've got no doubts about that, actually. But that process of change was very, very gradual and almost imperceptible. Occasionally there might be something quite sort of dramatic would happen. But usually it doesn't happen like that. It's certainly not in my case. Change is slow, gradual and subtle. But there's no doubt in my mind that radical change has taken place. I'm a much better human being than I was when I was 25 at 75, coming on 76. So fundamentally, that's my story. I've telescoped it more than I had anticipated. But there's two things actually I would like to. I will finish with two short stories because these are really, really important ones, important moments in my life, and it gives you a slightly different flavour from the dominant flavour of the evening. And that is, first of all, when I was here at the LBC in 1980, 1981, I came here because I'd been asked to come here. Subhuti had worked like a Trojan to get this place built with a bunch of amateur builders. You can't imagine what this place looked like. I mean, even the photographs don't do it justice. It was a total wreck. We had no money, and he pulled it off. after 4 years, him and Attila, his master carpenter, without Attila, this couldn't have been done. But those two people together really turned this place into the beautiful building it became. Anyway, he wanted, after the project was completed and opened, he wanted to do something else. I think his restless spirit got the better of him. He wanted to go away and write a book, and I was asked to come here. And so I came. And as you've already guessed, I mean, my time here wasn't particularly happy. And when, after 18 months, when people were thoroughly fed up with me, and I was obviously a bit down, I could see the writing was on the wall, I knew what was going on. There's a period of 3 weeks when everybody in the area, it seemed to me, wanted to see me and to talk to me. They didn't really want to, well, basically just wanted to tell me a few things that they'd probably been, holding in for a long time. And it all came out over a 3-week period. And I felt I was wandering around Bethnal Green like a punch-drunk boxer. I didn't know whether I was coming or going. Anyway, one morning, towards the end of this period, I was meditating upstairs. And there's a large community there, and there was over 30 people living upstairs, 35 or so. We used to share rooms in those days. And as I was meditating, one by one, all the other community members left, and I was left there sitting on my own. And suddenly, I had a vision of an angel. And the angel was a falling angel, and it was falling headlong downwards over a precipice, and fell a long, long, long way. And then, unexpectedly, there was a projecting rock, and the angel gently alighted upon that rock. And I knew immediately what the significance was. That angel, that falling, even fallen angel, was me. And I knew what the rock represented too, which was that no matter how badly I might think other people had behaved towards me, nothing could shake my faith in the Dharma. And that was one of the turning points in my life. Something of a quite different order happened in India. I spent quite a bit of time in India teaching. And on one occasion I was there, and I was about to become an anagarika. An anagarika is someone who takes a vow of complete chastity of body, speech and mind. Total sexual abstinence, in other words. Bhante was forever trying to get us to become anagarikas. It's a losing battle. But Subhuti and I have been and remain really, really good and close friends. And we both had ambitions in that direction. One day we were travelling together through France, I think, as far as I recall, and he started talking about it yet again with me. He said, why don't we do it together? Why don't we both become anagarikas together? We give each other a lot of support. Now, the backstory to this was, at the time, we were both in heterosexual relationships. Tricky. So, not for the first time in this life, I got caught up in his enthusiasm, which is very, very infectious. I should have known better. But anyway, I didn't. Neither did he. So yeah, we agreed. We decided this is what we were going to do. So of course I then had to tell my girlfriend. And we talked about it for a while. She's very sympathetic. She was an order member at that stage. And in the end I said, look, I'm really serious about this. You're going to have to find somebody else. Within 3 weeks, she'd got somebody else. Boy, that was painful. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna have to see this through. And when I finally asked Bhante if for his blessing to take the anagarika vow, I was expecting him to discuss it with me at length, and he just looked at me and said, well, you seem to know your own mind. That was it. Then I had to arrange the ceremony. Now the ceremony, there's problems setting that up, but anyway, without going into all that, eventually took place in India. And it was our retreat centre in Bhaja. Now Bhaja is the site of what could well be the most ancient rock temple anywhere in the world. And I decided to do the ceremony there. And so on the night of the full moon, in the middle of a meeting I was conducting, a Mitra and Venus meeting, we all traipsed off up to the cave. About a half an hour walk across a valley and up a slope into this ancient temple cave, at the end of which was a stupa, quite a large stupa. And I performed there. I took my anagarika vow there, and while I was sitting meditating after the ceremony, it's a very simple ceremony, I had a very, very powerful sense of a presence, and the presence that I felt was the presence of Darda Rinpoche, Bhante's principal teacher, and it deeply, deeply moved and inspired me. It was as if he'd arrived. I didn't take it literally, by the way, but certainly as if he was there, just to remind me of the seriousness of what I was doing. I remained in anagarika for 10 years, as did Subhuti. But then ceased. And on that point, I'm going to leave the story hanging in midair. You know part of it anyway. So it's been a kind of storytelling. So there you go. I've already gone over 5 minutes, so we better stop.
Well, thank you very much, Devamitra, and a real privilege for us to hear some of your story. And thank you.
Oops. Thank you very much. The story's not over yet.